Hey guys, Niklas here from Your Audio Solutions. Hope you guys are doing well. Today we have Jacquire King. I don't think he really needs an introduction, but if you don't know who he is, he's a Grammy Award-winning record producer, recording and mixing engineer. He has worked with artists such as Kings of Leon, James Bay, Norah Jones, Tom Waits, Buddy Guy, and the list goes on. It was a real pleasure talking to Jacquire. He's a great guy, and if you've seen his video like on Pure Mix or Recording Revolution, you know he's an awesome guy, and I think you're gonna love this interview. And in this interview, we spoke about James Bay and James's guitar playing, how to make artists perform in the studio, and the psychology of producing records or making records, how not to over-engineer when you record, and what to leave for the mixing process, why you don't need to be an expert in all areas of music to be able to produce other artists in the studio, the importance of people skills, making people comfortable in the studio, how to keep the vibe throughout the record making process, and questions he asks clients who want to work with him to see if it's a good fit or not. I think you're going to love this interview with Jacquire. He's a great guy, as I said. But before we get into the interview, I want to tell you about a free guide you can download right away. It's called 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. And in this guide, you can learn my tested email script on how to contact bands online, how to build profitable relationships with people in the industry. And if you're looking to get your foot in the door of the recording industry, I'll teach you that as well in the guide, and some tips of what I used to do and how I got into the industry in the first place. I think you're going to find it really helpful and beneficial. There's a link to that guide below. Check it out. But now over to Jacquire King. You know, I'd love to start out this conversation because I was listening to, actually, I saw your post on Instagram about James Bay and how that was in the top 100 album of the decade.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to that album, assisting a session here in London for a band called The Zombies.
Okay.
And I was listening to it back and forth on the train. I just remember it being this awesome album, and obviously you worked on it. What are your memories looking back on that album, you know, since it's a top 100 album now?
Well, I mean, when I first heard James's, when I was first sent his demos, I listened for a very short period of time to the demos, and I knew immediately that this is someone I wanted to make a record with, just because of the passion and in his voice. And I mean, his talent is huge, and it was still formative and a little bit raw in the demos, but it was there. I felt really attracted and compelled to it. So it wasn't a hard decision to sort of want to become engaged with it and make the record. I was pretty much like, yeah, I mean, get me on the phone with this guy right away. He had never had a band. He hadn't really had a band before. He hadn't recorded in the studio with a band. So getting to put a small band together, getting to know him, and just his excitement of starting the project. And we did it in chunks. He would come for a week or two at a time, and we would work on 3 or 4 songs. And we did that. We had, I think, three blocks of time leading up to a bigger block of time to finish the album. It was a great time. He's such a great guitar player, such a great vocalist. The songs were so strong, and we just made a good partnership in arranging the songs and finding the vision for the songs. And he followed my lead as a record maker really well. He had a strong artist vision for himself. So it was just a kind of a wonderful kind of coming together. And I knew we were making. You never know when you're making a record like how successful it's going to be. I think if anybody were to say that they knew 100% that it was going to be success, I think they'd be lying to you. I knew that we were making great records, and it felt special. We were having a really good time. So for it to go on to connect in the way that it did, it's a bonus. It's been absolutely fantastic in terms of getting together with a brand new artist and doing something that sort of launched his career and all that sort of happened for him since then. Yeah, I'm really really proud and excited that I had the opportunity to do that with him, and
Yeah.
of course, kind of blown away that it's as big of an album that it is in the UK for the decade, and those songs as well. For Hold Back the River and Let It Go to be
Yeah,
in
exactly.
as well.
They're awesome. I see a lot of younger artists here in the UK who, I mean, I might be wrong here, but it feels like a lot of them are imitating his guitar playing.
Yeah,
James's. It's become very popular again.
yeah.
I don't know really what you call it, but yeah, when you have the space between the notes. I don't know if there's a word for that guitar playing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he comes up with like cool, like melodic and rhythmic sort of, like the rhythmic textures, and just sort of like can carry a tune, and there's a lot of negative space, which is important, and it really makes the melodies and the progressions sort of stand out, and it's just a really good platform for his vocal style as well. And
Yeah.
I think that I think that happens, unfortunately, when artists see something working, that they kind of try to imitate it. So in some ways, it's nice to have those influences, but it's a little bit disappointing when people start to copy, as opposed to use it as inspiration. But I get it. I mean, that's how we all kind of learn to do things, is we're inspired and then we try to imitate a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how you start out learning, I guess, by copying, and then you make it your own, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate in that there's been a handful of records and albums that I've made where they kind of become influential in that way. Also my time with Kings of Leon, I've certainly seen my share of bands come to me. I've seen bands that I haven't worked with where the Kings of Leon records that I made have been an influence on them, and then younger artists that have come to me because they're inspired by Kings of Leon, and they have a sound that's informed by it. So I mean, it's I mostly look at it as positives.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. I'd like to go back actually to not the beginning, but there was a period, I might be wrong in this, but what I heard, or I think I heard this, is like your start in the industry, and it actually reminds me of myself where I'm at now. But if I get it right, if I understood it right, you tried LA, it didn't work. You moved to San Francisco, right? You moved in studio, you worked in studio, sorry, but it didn't really work in the studio first. You moved to live sound, and then you went back to working with bands, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that
yeah.
correct? Yeah. So I just
Well,
wonder.
I mean, I moved to San Francisco first, and
Hmm.
I lived there. I was in San Francisco for 12 years. I had started my career in around Washington D.C. So I moved. I had started in a studio in Maryland, and my career there. But then I wanted to move to a city that had more of a music scene, and ended up in San Francisco. My first studio job I worked at for maybe 6 or 9 months, and I got fired,
Hmm.
um, unfortunately, and so that sort of necessitated. So I didn't have a studio job. So I had been working as an assistant engineer, so I didn't have a full-time studio job,
Right.
and to sort of supplement, to be able to kind of still stay in music. I started doing live sound, and at the time, it was really just a way to take my skills and in a different area and kind of make a living, I guess. Kind of trying to get by.
Hmm.
Uh, and although that wasn't where my goals and passion lied, I learned a lot and I got a lot from it. And in hindsight, I think in hindsight, I realize now how much I grew from doing it. But after doing that for a while, I was ready to get back to the recording studio, and so
Yeah.
I started interning and finding ways to create community and opportunity for myself,
Right.
uh, and help some friends open a studio.
Right.
So that sort of that helped me get back in the studio, and then I did have some time in LA
Hmm.
after meeting Eric Valentine
Right.
in the Bay Area. he and I started to work together, and then he moved to LA, so I kind of followed him down there for some projects for a couple of years.
Cool.
And then, I ended up in Nashville more as a life decision, because it's where my wife is from, and there was a music community here. It all just made sense to try to have a family life here in Nashville, and it turned out to be a good thing. But my career trajectory, the live sound kind of became a way to also use my skill sets and the tools of the recording trade, but in a live sound format.
Environment, yeah. I mean, because I believe that, those first years, like you explained here, it feels like those are the years where a person either makes it or whatever that is, or quits, right?
Yeah.
So what was your mindset like? Was it just, I got to do this, there's nothing else? Or did you have any other thoughts in your head?
No, I didn't really have any other thoughts. I mean, it's kind of it's always kind of been all or nothing for me. That's just sort of how I am. Certainly, I've had many times over the course of, I've been doing this professionally. I've been paid to be in the studio for over 30 years now. So you have times of doubt, and it feels like you're not progressing, or things aren't happening, and then you have to think about other options, like what am I going to do? But primarily, especially starting out, it was just all or nothing. I'm gonna keep doing this until it wasn't really about until I become successful. Until, like, in a bigger sense, and kind of in the way that I have become. It was more that this is what I want my life to be, and I just kind of stuck to it. I mean, even after I had been working in studios and making records for almost 10 years, I still had to have part-time jobs like painting houses or doing various things just to kind of be able to get by and buy more gear, and do jobs where it was allowed me to have a flexible schedule, so I could paint for 2 weeks and then go work on a record, and it was fine,
Yeah. What did you learn in that period about, being a professional, being in the music industry, like patience, for example, and stuff like that?
A great deal of patience. Getting fired from a studio job was a really hard thing to adjust to.
Yeah.
And just kind of the feeling that nobody was going to hand me this. It wasn't going to be easy. I was just going to have to keep grinding away at it, and that translates into, as you progress through your career, when you want to move from being an assistant engineer to the first engineer, and when you want to start mixing more records and producing records, you're always kind of having to push up against the ceiling of where you're working. It's the perception for people to suddenly see you as more than the assistant engineer, to be able to build those relationships. You're constantly having to work extra hours and do extra things. It also kind of, I also sort of feel like you shouldn't really say no to anything. You should just do as much as you possibly can, especially early on, because it may not necessarily be the project or the smaller career path. It's like maybe you're an engineer and you want to make records, but you have an opportunity to work on film scores. So it's like, well, you should do that, because the people that you meet, and you're going to gain experience, and the people you meet, you're going to kind of create a larger circle of influence, and then other opportunities will kind of happen from that. So early on, especially, I don't think there's anything that you should shy away from doing, because you also learn maybe where your true strengths are and some of your weaknesses, just in terms of your skill set. And sometimes we do things that we don't think are right for us, and they end up being right for us.
Yeah. Do you have any examples like that happened to you?
Well, I thought I didn't want to do live sound,
Right.
But I was doing it at first out of necessity, and then I became much better at it, and I learned and grew a lot from it. And although it wasn't going to be that wasn't the path that I wanted to stay on, I didn't want to be working in clubs and theaters and going on tour and doing shows. I mean, I love that experience, but I love the idea of committing music to a record and it being a permanent document of the time. And but I gained a tremendous amount from it. My working in the studios was hugely informed by the skills that you need to develop as a live mixer. You have to work fast. You have to know how to prioritize. What are the elements of this live mix that I have to get right first to kind of have the show be a good presentation as quickly as possible, and then sort of work on the other things. And that also translates to a mix. I mean, typically, if you're mixing a band, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can mix live, but if you're mixing a band, I mean, typically the vocal needs to be heard over whatever volume is being created on the stage by amplifiers and drums and whatever. So you got to get the vocal sounding good and present and clear, and then make sure that the kick drum's loud enough. There's things that you have to sort out, and then you can figure out some of the other elements, and you just have to do that stuff quickly. So that translates into getting a mix together for a record.
Yeah, exactly.
In a fast manner.
Yeah. And also, do you remember, because you spoke about the transition from assistant to the first engineer to producer, for example, do you remember when that started to happen, or could you see that shift happening to yourself?
Yeah, I remembered at different stages. Me meeting Eric Valentine is a good first example. I was the main engineer in Studio A at Toast, which was a studio that was in San Francisco, and it was a Neve room, and we had a studio tape machine, and I had brought a Pro Tool system in there. So I was the main engineer. But when Eric came in, because that was sort of my room, I became the assistant engineer. So a lot of times I'd been in there firsting. But when he brought the first Third Eye Blind record in, and I became his assistant, and so I was a bit overqualified to just be an assistant, but I did a great job at assisting, and Eric recognized and acknowledged my level of ability, and so subsequent to that we became friends, and he hired me for other projects to be a first engineer. Wow. So it's really, so I guess I use that example as I took my opportunity to be an assistant engineer and just did it to the best of my ability, and sort of set aside all of my first engineer thinking and behavior, so to help to help Eric, and that sort of demonstrated to him that I was someone that was knowledgeable, but that was easy to work with. And that he could trust to assist him as opposed to try to compete with him engineering wise. So that sort of changed. So that created an opportunity. Or if you're the recording engineer on a project and you're not going to be the person mixing, still make mixes, make great rough mixes. Not only because it's good to have the practice, because if you make a bunch of rough mixes of the record you've recorded and then it goes off and Michael Brower mixes it, right? You can compare the work that you did to the work that Michael did, and you can grow and learn from that. But then also the producer or the studio or whoever else, the band that you're working with, although it's not intended for you to have that job, you're demonstrating your willingness to work and that you have a skill set. And that may not give you the opportunity to mix that record, but they'll remember it, and a future opportunity will come to you. Yeah. That's little things like that. You're just always demonstrating that, and you have to do it carefully, because if you're an intern or assistant engineer, you don't want to be speaking up and interfering in someone else's job.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just like giving yourself opportunities to grow and to show other people that your growth. Because I did get a couple of those guys in the band in a different opportunity. A couple of the guys in the band, you know, when they were doing other projects or they were giving a reference to a friend, you know, they talked about me because I did a great job recording their record, and then I made rough mixes that they liked. So it's like, oh, you know, hey, this person can help you, and then another great artist might come along, and you do a little bit more of the overall work. And so, because it's always a slow build, and you have to just do as much as you can and be patient, because the record cycle, the impact of record making takes a long time. It's like we might be talking to an artist today that will record in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
And then it might take 6 months to a year before that project comes out. And then it's another 6 months or a year before people have heard it enough and connected the dots that you did that before they come back to you. So you're anywhere from a year and a half to 3 years out on the result of your work.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you have to play the long game. You have to be patient. And, you know, the other thing is if, it takes the experience. I mean, the idea that you know how to use a tool, just because you know how to use a hammer doesn't necessarily mean you know when to use a hammer.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
You know, and so you have to have a lot of experience to kind of know how to draw on your skill set. And then also finding success quickly can be, I think that can be even harder to adjust to, because maybe you do something and it becomes successful, and it gets you into some situations where maybe you're not experienced enough to do the next thing. You haven't really grown into it. And then if people this is the expectation and being put in a place that you're not completely ready for, that can kind of be a negative and a hard thing to kind of work through.
Yeah, for sure, man. That makes sense. You mentioned quickly, you know, if an artist reaches out to you, etc. I'd love to know, if a band reaches out to you, what are the first questions you ask them to understand if it's a good fit, for example?
One of the questions I generally ask is, what is it about me that you think, how can I help you? What is it that you're seeking out that you feel like I might be a good fit for? So then they can kind of give you some information about how they view you and what they think the partnership is gonna be like. Because for me, record making it's a partnership. It's always a partnership. It's not me just plugging musicians and songs into a method of record making. It's like I want to create each record and interaction with an artist and every opportunity as a unique thing. So that's one of the questions I always ask.
Right.
And I ask them about what their goals are based on, well, okay, if they already have a recorded, you know, like you've already made a record or two, it's like, well, how do you want to grow from the last one, or what changes are you trying to, you know, implement, or just get a feel for what their vision is and why they think I can help them, and then encourage them to ask me questions. Typically, they want to talk about the process. What's it like to work with me? How do I go about organizing and running sessions? Do we all play together to start out, or is it just the drums? You know, and then piece by piece. I tend to do things more as an ensemble.
Yeah.
And you know, the other thing for me is I have to think that the songs have to have potential to make great records out of.
So you ask for demos, for example, or rough takes?
Yeah, and I don't really love the idea of full production demos, although they're becoming more and more common. I'd rather just hear a work tape of the song, a simple version of the song, so there isn't any vision already sort of placed around it. But I don't discourage that, because for some artists and some creators, they really need to do that whole process to understand if they've got a song that they can get behind.
Right.
But it's I also want to feel like I can. There's something of value creatively in the opportunity for me, because I don't want to just show up and not feel like I have a connection to
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, the creative possibilities. Even if it may not be music that I am particularly drawn to on a personal level, but if I think that there's a good creative opportunity to help somebody, and that the interaction will be positive and creative. Yeah, those are the things I look for.
Right. And are there any red lights that comes up, and in that case, do you then avoid it, or what are those red lights that can pop
Uh,
up?
well, I think it's always important to have some sort of communication, a phone call, a video chat, or I mean, my favorite is to meet in person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to just get a feel. I mean, red lights would be if we had a hard time having a conversation, just
Mm-hmm.
even about anything, particularly working together. Um, and I think asking the question of what makes them think of me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if they describe something that I feel like is that not actually their perception of who I am and how I can help them is not really accurate, well then that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a red flag too.
Right.
Um, I don't I don't think everybody that I work with needs to be a great singer
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, because I mean I think that there are singers and there are vocalists,
Right.
performers. Uh,
What's the difference there between
well,
those?
uh, um, well, a vocalist is someone that is able to interpret. They're probably a skilled singer. They
Mm-hmm.
probably have a skilled voice, and they're like an interpreter of songs, and they can perform. Then so that's kind of more of, I mean, that's a little bit more of a vocalist. A singer to me is someone that has like a little bit more of their own identity
Mm.
and character. Um, and not everybody has to have a great singing voice to be a compelling, uh, presenter of a song. So I look for things like believability and emotion and character in a voice, like a unique quality that makes it feel like you're going to recognize that singer's voice,
Mm.
that vocalist's voice right away. Um, yeah, I mean, it's hard to necessarily quantify. I mean, because a lot of it is just going off my gut feeling.
Mm. Yeah.
If I feel like that there's some depth of sincerity and connection to it. Because I think sometimes like a vocalist may not be able to, they might sing it and sing all the right notes and have the phrasing good, but it might lack some emotional depth and
Mm.
connection to the song. I really really want to feel a connection to it, because when record making, I'm always trying to find some truth that reflects some inspiration and depth of emotional quality.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I also heard that you're big, you know, um, proponent of performances, obviously.
Hmm.
So do you have any, or actually, what are you listening to, and what is usually lacking when the performance is not there?
Just a feeling of commitment,
Mm.
um, uh, and really because somebody can play something perfectly, and it cannot feel very inspired. It's
Mm.
kind of, you know, they played all the right notes and they played all the correct notes, and it was in time, but it doesn't really have any depth of feeling, or there's no fire in it, or struggle,
Mm.
no emotion or angst, or whatever the feeling may be. I'm looking for something that has that character of really digging for something, and sort of being, um, uh, what's the right way to describe it? Because you can have a wonderful recording and a performance that has mistakes in it, but it has to have a feeling of conviction and being in the moment. And
Mm.
so I like performance based recording where you have ensembles of people and they're playing off of each other. It's not just a drummer playing to a click track that knows the arrangement of the song and has their parts laid out. It's like I want them to feel the other people, the other musicians playing with them and responding. So there's a bit of a give and a take, and the dynamic is informed by everyone playing together, and hearing the voice, hearing the singer sing the song. Now, that's not to say that I make live recordings.
No.
But, it's everybody kind of playing together and kind of understanding the landscape of the song and how they're going to move through it together. At the end of it, maybe all you do keep is the drums, and maybe you fix the drums a little bit. Maybe you punch some things in where you want to change a fill, or you want to use the second verse from a different take. But that relationship of everybody playing together, as many people as you can have play together at the same time, the song sounds more fully realized. It's more representative of the way it will be in the end. And you can make adjustments off of each other in the moment as well. And even if you only keep the drums and you re-record everything else, well, that drum performance was informed by everyone playing together.
Yeah, exactly.
So those things are important to me, and I'd rather do it that way. I'd rather set everyone up and record together with the possibility that we're only going to keep the drums and have to redo everything else. I'd just rather do things that way, because it just feels, because you have the relationship of performance and of the musicians playing together. If you just record the drums to like a scratch vocal and some instrument to a click track, well, then the main thing that the drummer is going to be paying attention to is playing with the click.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no. Now, great drummers can do, like great studio drummers who have a lot of experience can anticipate and embed a lot of that feel, but that's a special skill, and that's not something you're going to get working with a band, say, or a group of people that are used to playing together in a certain way. So that's why I like performance-based recording.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. How do you make the artists or musicians, feel comfortable taking those risks or chances whilst recording?
By not making anybody feel any more undue pressure than they already are. I mean, typically, when everybody shows at the studio, everybody wants to do a great job. So just making sure that people like the way they sound, that they're comfortable, that I have an interaction with everybody, because I keep going back to bands, but there's a lot of psychology involved in record producing, So with a band, you typically have the stronger personalities and the quieter ones, the people that contribute more, maybe write more of the music and are kind of more of the leaders. Well, of course you have to pay attention to them, and you have to have a dialogue with them. But let's say the bass player is not very vocal, and kind of, the singer's telling him or her half the parts that they should be playing. Well, that's fine, but I want to go and have a conversation with the bass player to make sure that they know that I'm paying attention to them and I sort of care about them. Just make everybody feel comfortable and make sure that we're all trying to move at the same pace. If you got to kind of hold somebody back to let somebody else catch up, you sort of do that diplomatically. Yeah. And then sometimes you need to now, so that's kind of all like kind, considerate stuff. But then sometimes you need to really speak the truth to somebody. You need to challenge somebody. But if you do it respectfully, and you've demonstrated that your goal is to help everybody have a great outcome, when you maybe have to go have a hard conversation with one person or the group, then they understand that it's out of respect, and it's that my intention is to make a great record with them, which is what they want. And sometimes you have to talk about the truth, and when things aren't working, and so it's just really about creating an environment where everybody feels safe. And it's like if I make a mistake or I'm unsure, I say that. so that everybody feels like, well, it's like we're all human. We're all trying to figure this out together, and we'll get there. We have everybody's really determined, but we're also going to have patience to get there with one another. And so I just try to create an environment like that, because sometimes you just have to do work. You have to work on ideas that you maybe don't think are great ideas, or you don't think it's going to work, or however, because all of that stuff is part of the journey and informs where you go. Because someone might have an idea that it doesn't seem like it's going to work, and you try it and no, it's not working, but then it makes you think about a different opportunity that you wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. Yeah. So it's just trying to foster an environment of safety, trust, respect, with a common goal.
Yeah.
And just really try to help everybody do that, and sort of say yes a lot. You sort of say yes a lot, and then if you say yes to something and you start to record a part, everybody kind of knows whether it's working or not.
Yeah.
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 And it's just like you can just then honestly say, well, we tried it. I don't think it's the right thing. I think that doesn't really offend anybody. And then if you say, at a certain point, if you say, no, I don't want to do that, or no, that's not the right thing, or you need to stop doing that and do this, then they'll respect it more, because they understand your intention, and that you have given them of yourself. You've given them your time to pursue something on their behalf, and then it's just like it's building trust as well.
Yeah,
I know, kind of a long way to say that, but it's just kind of creating a cooperative, trusting environment where everybody feels like they can be themselves, and they're not going to be judged for not playing well, or taking a while to find the part and find the performance. Just fostering that kind of environment.
Yeah. And are there any other things you found to be important when making a record, that you just mentioned?
Well, just in terms of like engineering, being organized, being organized, being thorough. When a piece of gear stops working, don't let it drag the session down. Unless it actually stop the session. Just don't get upset about it. It's disappointing, but don't ruin the vibe with engineering stuff. A good performance will make a mediocre sound great. A great sound will not make a performance great.
Yeah.
So making sure that the performer is happy and comfortable and able to be creative and not feel inhibited, and that you're not taking the momentum out of the situation because of a technical thing. Because the technical thing, unless it's going to stop the session, it's not that important. So just things like that. Just having a good team and a clear vision. Having a clear vision. And when I say team, I mean like whoever's helping you. And now some people have to do all this on their own.
Yeah.
They're the engineer, they're the assistant, they're the producer. Sometimes they're even also some of the musicians, right?
Yeah.
But having a good template in your DAW setup, having things labeled, and just being able to be organized and efficient, so that you can move at the speed of creativity. Those things are important, and if you do that, I mean, really, it should be easy. The hardest part is just deciding how to communicate with people and how to pace things. It'll come. Great music will come if you just foster it the right way, and you make sure that you've provided the opportunity. And then once something good happens, take a step back. Don't continue to grind it into the ground.
Right.
Looking for something better. If you feel like you've worked for a couple hours to get a good take or version of the song, and you got there, take a step back from it. Just get away for 10 minutes, go out of the studio, and then come back and listen to it. And then it's either yes, that feels done, or okay, now that we have that, let's go in and try it one more time. We've got that. We're in a good place. Let's just go give it another try. Sometimes it gets better. Sometimes it gets worse. and
Right.
then like, okay, well, it's getting better. Let's keep pursuing it, or like, let's not waste our energy. Let's focus on on the one we already have. Just
Yeah.
stuff like that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is self-awareness and people skills.
Right.
Because anybody, I mean, you can spend a couple days on YouTube and figure out how to record a vocal.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, but it's that thing of like, knowing how to use a tool does not necessarily teach you when to use a tool.
Yeah. Someone else told me that. I don't know when that was. Maybe it was last week. Another guy I talked to said the same thing. And it's very true. Which is that's a fascinating.
As engineers, we should have tons of tricks and methods and ways we mic the drums or whatever. It's just, well, which do you choose and when?
Yeah.
Who was saying that? I spoke over you. Who was saying?
I think it was because I interviewed Ian Sefcik, the guy who's a mastering engineer at Capitol, and he makes those compressors too, the Magic Death Eye. I think he said it. It must have been him. I'm quite sure.
Okay. I think that's a great. I think it's a great mindset. I know thousands of ways to hook gear up and how to, tons of different ways to mic something. It just depends on, well, what are you trying to do? I shy away from people that always set things up the same way. They do things the same way, because then you're not really paying attention to what's needed and because you're making a translation. You're capturing and translating a performance and a statement and an emotion, and documenting it. And you're framing it. So you kind of have to understand what's going to be the right conduit to get it from, out of the air so that you've recorded it and it can come out of the speakers.
Yeah. And how much do you, talking about making, a statement of what's happening, how much do you commit during recording versus being, I'll do it when it comes to mixing, for example?
I would like to think I do it 100% of the time.
Cool. Yeah.
It's that's my intention anyways. There are some times, where you might be a little unsure, so you kind of leave yourself a little bit of latitude. Don't, sometimes like, well, don't overcommit to this. But as much as possible, I'm trying to record the sound that I want to hear as the finished sound. Now, does that say that mixing is not important? No, not at all. It's because then you have to take all those pieces and fit them together, and you have to enhance and kind of get them to fit tighter and have a more powerful presentation. But you're not trying, when you're trying to mix, you're not trying to interpret. Like the interpreting, hopefully as much of it is done on the front end. And then also, I feel like working that way, it informs the other things that you add to it. So, if your intention is to have like a guitar part be really dirty and aggressive, to fit the aesthetic of what you're trying to do and what the final outcome is going to be. Well, don't record a clean guitar, and don't record a clean guitar and just say, well, I'm going to make it aggressive later, because if you're listening to a clean guitar, well, then you might be looking to put that attitude on some other instrument or some other part, or and then they don't really mesh together. And then everything is just kind of undecided, and then you have just all this decision making in the end, and to me that's no way to mix.
Sure. What did you say at the beginning there? You said mixing is not supposed to be interpreting. What did you say? I forgot it.
Yeah, now obviously, I don't know exactly what I said, but
it felt very good.
I don't want to interpret. I don't want, in the mixing stage, I don't want to be trying to figure out what the outcome should be. Now, sometimes it's good. It's good to. I enjoy mixing other people's stuff because I have no relationship with it, and if I feel like something kind of more extreme needs to happen to kind of make it kind of exciting and fit together the way I feel it, well, then I go for it. And I'm not saying that everything I record is just a balancing act in the end,
Mm-hmm.
for mixing. But it's, like if I send a song to someone else to mix, they should be able to push up the faders, and it kind of like, okay, well, I get it. It's like I kind of understand how this is, where it's headed.
Right.
So you're not there left wondering how to interpret it, or like, well, what do they want to do with this?
Mm-hmm.
The statement is already being made, and I think
Right.
it's really important.
Yeah. And do you find yourself having to explain to them if you're recording something and not mixing it? Do you
Mhm.
feel like you have to send notes to the mixing engineer? Like, no.
No, not typically. When the predominant feedback I get is that that they enjoy the experience because because they like the way the sounds have been put together,
Mm.
and that the record sounds like the record already, and they're just kind of accentuating and highlighting and bringing a dynamic, and leveling it up. So most of the time, most of the feedback I get is like positive and like kind of a thank you for giving something that's so clear, and there's not a bunch of tracks like they're wondering. There's not a bunch of tracks trying to do all the same thing,
Mm.
or how do these fit together, and like having to decide what to use and not to use.
Yeah.
It's like it's most of the time if I give something to someone else, I want them to use all the tracks I gave them.
Mm.
Yeah. Sometimes things can get turned off. I'm not saying, and there's nothing hard and fast about it, but
Right.
that's sort of the feedback that I generally get. And when I mix a record, I don't want to mix a record where I have to figure out what it's supposed to sound like.
Mm. Makes sense.
It should have. I mean, now obviously there's a lot of nuance and change that can be brought about, and you can kind of push it in different directions. But I don't want to have to completely interpret what it's supposed to be.
Right. I mean, something I noticed with myself, just going back to like being a musician and stuff, and it ties in with mixing, I hope. But and it goes back to producing a record. Like the whole process starts with the arrangement of the instrument. And I know I do that mistake. Sometimes I put a piano and a guitar in the same register, and then it becomes hard to work with. Is that something you think about when working with records and stuff?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's for me. It's kind of all on the front. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love mixing, and that's a huge part of what I do. But the recording process, the producing process, is all about figuring out the arrangements and the way that the instruments should work together, and not have things that are competing, that they're playing off each other, they're accentuating each other, they find their own space. And that's sonics, that's arrangement, and
But that's what's so great about James Bay.
that's something I'm always thinking about.
Right. But like with James Bay's guitar playing, it's there's so much space between the notes,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes the whole thing, awesome, I guess.
It gives it a depth. The thing is,
Yeah.
it's like negative space is very important. I think that a negative space is often, not always, but it's often overlooked.
Was it negative space you mean as there's not a lot of stuff happening, or
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And then making sure that the things that are happening are important. That like James is like you take James Bay for instance. James is never just. I mean, I wouldn't say never, but he very rarely is just strumming chords.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the point, right? I mean, that's what that rhythm should be on the drums or percussion, or that the bass can be more active, or that the piano can fill some of that space, or whatever it is. It's having that negative space gives you depth, and it allows other things to speak, and then that as you described the James's guitar parts, there's the moments in between the notes that actually makes the notes that he does play more expressive.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Thelonious Monk said that it's I'm probably totally not quoting this correctly, but it's important. It's more important to know what not to play than what to play.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Exactly.
that's so true.
Yeah. I mean, something I spoke to a friend about, and this is something I'm struggling with. I'm not good at it, and that is to be able to sing what I play, basically.
Mm.
Sometimes I think I do it unconsciously, but I know I'm not good at it. And, but people who can do it, I always find them be way more better players than people who just play for the sake of playing, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I find it really, really fascinating
It
thing.
is true. I wish I was better at being able to vocalize the parts in my mind, that I'm thinking or feeling.
Mm,
But it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And it shouldn't inhibit you.
no.
And sometimes, sometimes I myself used to see that as a little bit of a weakness. That like I couldn't. I'm not. I'm an okay musician. I'm a very okay musician.
Mm,
And I can't really sing that great. And here I am giving direction to like world class musicians.
right.
I used to kind of feel bad about that, or think a little bit less of my skill. But then I also realized, well, part of that can be a strength because I'm approaching it more as a listener.
Yeah.
So there's something good about that. Sometimes being the producer, engineer, and the best musician in the room
Mm,
can get in the way of helping the people that you're making the record for be their best.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
That makes sense. Um, and do you have any like favorite mistake that set you up for later success in the studio or just in life in general, maybe?
um, well, I kind of think I was recording some guitars for an album once, and it was one particular song, and I wasn't really hearing the. I was using like a Neve sidecar, and I wasn't really hearing some of the overloading distortion that was happening with the Neve. There's these little tiny crackles sometimes in the recording,
Right.
but the parts felt great. And so the mistake was I became fixated on my mistake as an engineer,
Mm,
and I was also producing. So I was like, we need to record these guitars again because this is just not, this is not going to do. We
right.
can't leave it this way.
Mm,
And so technically, I got a sound that didn't have that mistake in it, but I lost the inspired performances by doing it over. And to me, the guitars never felt as like the performances never felt as good as the first time we did it.
right.
And so that was a mistake, putting the technical thing in front of the performance. And in the end, subsequent to that, I was like, oh wow, I hear that same distortion on lots of records and stuff. It's and until I was listening for it, I didn't notice it.
Right.
So it's not it. So maybe it's not that important. Now, I'm not saying that we should be careless as engineers, but you have to know when the performance and inspiration is more important than the sound.
Mm,
So that's one example of a mistake that it's like, well, I never want to do that again,
right. Right. Right.
unless those guitar sounds were unusable.
Mm,
Then that was a mistake. Or I observed one time I was assisting for an engineer producer, and he spent a lot of time. He's an excellent engineer, someone I admire his engineering, and I learned something from him in a good way. In that he strung together a bunch of things. He had like 2 Pultecs and 2 compressors and had this really elaborate signal chain, and he got an amazing snare drum sound. But it took him over an hour to do it, like trying these combinations of
right.
gear. And at the end of that time of getting a fantastic snare drum sound, no argument that it was a great snare drum sound,
Mm,
he'd worn the drummer out,
right.
and he kind of had deflated the drummer's enthusiasm. And while the rest of the band kind of like left the studio while they were getting a drum sound for hours on end, it kind of took all the enthusiasm out of the session. And I was like, well, that was great engineering, but that was really poor producing.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's like the snare drum didn't, like 15 minutes after working on the sound, the snare drum already sounded pretty darn good. You know, so the other 45 minutes to get it to sound a little bit greater wasn't really valuable.
Right. I mean, I guess that goes back a bit to, the difference between recording and mixing. That could be something that maybe you could leave to the mixing stage in that case, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's does this sound fit the intention? Does it feel like it's part of, like, a contributing, a good sound that contributes to the intention? And do I know that I can finesse it a little bit more later? Well, then it's time to move on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, the other thing is like, if you spend 5 or 6 hours getting a drum sound, and you get this amazing drum sound, well, you got an amazing drum sound, but have you considered what it's going to sound like when the guitars and the bass and everything else starts to? So for me, I'll work to get a drum sound that feels like, okay, I'm 70 or 80% sorted on this drum sound. Like, okay, so let's stop on the drums for a minute. Let me get the other instruments kind of going, and let's hear everybody play together. And it's like, okay, now I know what I need to change on the drums to get it to 100% to fit the intention of what we all sound like together.
Yeah.
Because I could make a amazing drum sound. Everybody be like, whoa, that sounds great. And then everybody else starts playing. It's like, well, it doesn't quite fit. It's taking up too much room, or it's the wrong thing, whatever,
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, because, I guess that goes back to your live days, you just got to get the show, so to speak, for lack of a better word, going,
Yep.
So that's the great skill to have.
Well, you want to keep everybody engaged.
Yeah.
You want to keep the momentum going, and you really don't know what the drums should sound like in terms of fitting the song and the what everybody else is doing until you hear everything.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe a part of the drum part is too busy for what James is going to play on the guitar, and you don't know that until you hear James play the guitar with the drums.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, okay, well, I mean, that's the guitar part is the song. The vocal and the guitar part is the song. That's where it started. That's what James wrote. So the drums need to fit that.
Yeah.
So it's just like you got to kind of put it all together, and then step back and say, well, how can this work more in harmony?
Yeah, exactly, man. And do you have any like moments, because you've had a great career so far, and it's not over yet, obviously. But do you have any moments that stand out for you all these years in, as a positive memory, so to speak?
Many. Getting working with Tom Waits was a great moment, and being able to, I learned a lot from that, just in being quick, because he doesn't want to play the songs a bunch, and about the importance of performance and not fussing too much about the technical stuff. He would tell me all the time, stop engineering.
Okay.
Like, that's enough, stop engineering, and so, I mean, I learned a lot from that, a huge opportunity. I was a huge fan.
That record is really cool.
Getting to engineer and mix the second Kings of Leon record, which then gave me an opportunity to kind of come back and produce, engineer, and mix the fourth record. I don't know. There's so many things I'm grateful for, and so many great memories. I love being in the studio and doing all that work to get to the place where everybody can kind of play together, and you kind of hear a song, you can hear a song happen. And I have so many memories of when that feeling started to get really magical, and the energy got elevated, and it's like the music coming out of the speaker starts to sound like a record. And then just kind of like stopping and watching the musicians play and listening and just kind of taking it in, because, sometimes I've been fortunate to a couple years later, maybe hear that song play over somebody's car radio, or it's in the restaurant that I'm eating dinner in, and I immediately just have that memory to go back to, and it's like, yeah, I was there, I was feeling it when it was being created, I was part of it, and I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's cool, man. What do you think Tom Waits meant when he said stop engineering? Was there something specifically you were doing, or?
Well, it's that example of the engineer and the snare drum.
Right, right, right.
Like after 15 minutes, stop engineering. You've already you have a great drum sound.
Right, right.
Stop fiddling with it, because your focus isn't on the right thing. It's
Yeah, that's interesting.
Tom is not someone that wanted to, he didn't really want a perfected sound. He wanted a sound that had character to it. It's a danger. The better you become at mixing, I mean, sometimes I get sometimes people tell me it sounds too good.
Right. Yeah.
It's not, it's just like, can you dumb it down a little bit, or can you it's not that I made it sound overly polished, or it's just this, it's just a little, maybe it's a little too tightened up. Everything is speaking really, really clearly, and everything has its place. And sometimes that's not the right thing, because I have the skill set to do it, and I can hear it, and I can implement it. Sometimes that takes it too far. It's just like, well, can we peel it? Can we peel some of that refinement back, so it kind of gets back to a little bit of the feeling of it?
I mean, something, from having assisted some awesome session, sometimes when I've heard a finished product, it doesn't feel like anything like it felt in the studio. Maybe it's what you said, become too defined, or whatever you want to call it. So how do you keep that rawness? Maybe it's not rawness, but the vibe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's in many areas, but if a performance feels good overall, it has energy. It's just like, well, yeah, maybe it's like, yeah, maybe right there it's a little. It's like maybe in the second verse, when the second verse starts, it's a little loose. It's a little loose, and you might be thinking that when you've just got the basic tracks going. You've got just a few of the instruments, and it might feel a little bit loose in that configuration. But if I'm overly concerned about that, and then I start looking at that, and I start trying to fix that, and then I start viewing the rest of it as needing fixing, and I've taken some of the human relationship out of it. Because oftentimes what you find is that as you record more stuff, or as the singer maybe sings over that slightly loose part in the verse, it's like they might find the pocket where they make it feel good, and you never think about it again. So I try not to overcorrect stuff as I go. It's just, well, if it feels good, it is good. And if there's some little things that I hear once in a while that maybe kind of pull me, I just kind of make a mental note. Sometimes I fix them right then and there, because that's like, okay, well, that's not gonna. But then sometimes just, okay, I'm going to leave that alone and just see how it holds up over time. And I think that's a thing that happens, is the excitement and energy of capturing something in the studio certainly is definitely a place to take a mental note, because as you progress something and maybe you start to clean it up and edit it and then mix it, you take some of that life out of it. So you have to realize that if we put everything on the grid, then it doesn't really have a unique relationship, does it?
No, exactly.
If everything is rhythmically together perfectly, and everything's in tune, well, then what sort of character is that? Because it's like, you can make all music be like that, and it doesn't have any depth of where people are drifting around the pocket a little bit in the way they're playing with each other. Because sometimes it should shift. Sometimes the bass player should be a little bit on top. Most of the time they kind of want to be back, but how far back? And when should they be back? It's so.
I mean, it's interesting, because I saw this video on YouTube. Maybe the guy is called Rick Beato. Became quite popular, and he discussed what's funky. And there was a band that is popular today, and there was a drum break that supposedly was funky to a journalist, and he asked, "What is funky?" Because the James Brown song, I forgot the name, really popular song, shifted, I don't know, 20 BPM, and this song was to the grid. And it goes to what you're saying, if something, is moving you and is funky in this case, and even though it shifts, that's the way to go, I guess, if you want
Yeah,
to do that.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
Mm.
even when I have performers play to a click,
Mm.
the click is just there as a reference. Sometimes in the chorus they might be ahead of the click, and then they get back to the verse, they kind of bring it back down, and they're kind of floating around the click, maybe a little bit behind it. The click is just a reference. I don't then say, okay, well, you guys are ahead in the chorus, so I'm going to move it back to be on the grid. It's like I don't do that. Typically, it's like a ref. It's like it's a reference point, and nobody's the in the end, the mixer doesn't put the click in the track for everybody to listen to how tight everybody was. Um, uh, so it's just kind of leaving in as much of the human musician element as you can, and I think there's a little bit of a trend to get back to sounds that aren't as refined. They sound a little broken, and performances are a little bit looser than they used to be in some regards, because that feels more honest.
I think so, yeah.
I don't think there is. I don't really have a set of rules. It's just like I just try to spend time with stuff, and if something is, every time I listen to it, is telling me that note needs to be moved, or that's out of pitch, then I'll fix it. Otherwise I just kind of leave it alone. And some things I don't fix until I'm mixing,
Right.
because because you might change the balance and relationships of things, and what was feeling like out of time may not have that feeling anymore when you're mixing. And if it does, then I'll just fix it then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool, man. And then I know I asked you, the positive things. Looking at the other side of the coin, so to speak, has there been any moments when you thought, "Damn, is this going to work out?"
Certainly. Yeah, and and it's important that we pay attention to those feelings. I mean, yeah, if you're not on the same page in the studio, and there's a lot of creative struggle. I'm trying to think of a specific instance. I mean,
Right.
record making's not easy. There's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of uncomfortable time that needs to be spent to figure out how to get to the right place. I can't really think of. I guess I try not to be fixated on the negative. I
Right.
can't really. There's been sessions, yeah, where where the combination and chemistry of the people in the room has just not really kind of arrived at making a great record. I mean, on the Norah Jones album I made, we used 5 different rhythm sections, and 30 musicians total over the whole album, and we tried multiple songs with multiple rhythm sections. Some were better than others. Some of them felt more like the song and just had like more of the right energy. And in a couple instances, I won't name names, but there was a well-known and popular rhythm section that came in to do a tune that was not really quite in their wheelhouse, and we just, it just wasn't happening. So we just kind of had to say, okay, well, I just basically had to say, okay, well, we got it, knowing that we're not going to use this.
Right.
I didn't, I didn't tell everybody, okay, we're quitting, you guys suck.
No.
It's just politely like, okay, well, let's finish recording this. And there wasn't a feeling of elation. I mean, everybody could probably tell in that moment that it didn't really go that great, but there wasn't a pointing of fingers, and it was like, okay, well, thank you very much, and just didn't use it.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's the best way of dealing with it. for example, in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, talking about something more fun, I guess, than the negative stuff. Do you have any exciting stuff coming up in the future, in the new year, so to speak?
um, well, I haven't totally decided. There's a few different things in conversation in terms of projects. Nothing. There isn't a whole lot that's been decided concretely. There's an unknown. Well, they're not totally unknown, but there's a little known sort of folk pop band, like a trio from Ohio called Oliver Hazard,
Hmm.
which you're gonna probably make a record with. I'm excited about that. I have to finish mixing the Smith and Burroughs album
Right.
in the new year, and then yeah, there's several things. I won't mention them just because they're not
Right.
decided. They're not finished. Even I've had two projects that I can think of for this year, for 2019, where I spent time in the studio working on something, and uh, it just didn't turn out to be so the thing is we're all going to get fired, and not everybody's going to love all the work we do, and not everything we're going to do is successful. And I don't mean just like selling a lot of records. I just mean that it has an elevated, great outcome. That's
Hmm.
part of it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Not every. I mean, your favorite football club, they might be the number one on the table, but they don't win all their games.
No, yeah.
You know, just like yeah, so you kind of have to learn and grow from it.
Yeah.
Um, what else am I doing? I'm giving some. I'm going back in June to do another Mix with the Master
Ah,
seminar.
cool. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm looking forward to.
My friend is
There's
getting married there actually, so that should
Oh
be.
yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
They do a lot of weddings there. It's a beautiful campus.
Yeah, it looks
Beautiful.
awesome.
Are you going to go to the wedding?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely. That's
Awesome.
my chance to go to La Fabrique, you know.
Yeah, you'll get to see the studio. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm doing a seminar in Rome after that, and I'll probably do some seminars in South America. So
Cool.
I'm looking forward to that.
Are you
That kind
coming
of
to London at all? Are you doing anything in London, England?
not as of yet. No,
Right, right, right. That's too
no.
bad.
Well,
um,
it can always be organized.
yeah, 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 for sure, man. See what we can
Uh,
do.
Yeah, I mean, it's there is. I'm going to do some content with So when I'm over there, I'll do some content for the platform for Mix of the Masters.
Mm.
Um, I'm going to do some more content. I have content that'll come out on Pure Mix.
Hmm.
I'm going to go to New York in April, I think, and do an in studio thing with Fab for the platform for that platform.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, Pure Mix
yeah,
is
just
awesome,
kind of
man.
diversifying. I've been working on. We're about to relaunch my website, and I've been working on gearing up to do some of my own like content that's not necessarily affiliated with because I did a course recently with Recording Revolution,
Yep, seen that.
and all those things are wonderful, and I'll continue those partnerships. I kind of want to curate and develop a little bit of my own
Hmm.
stuff. Yeah, just kind of diversifying, mixing records for people. Trying to think what else might be coming up. Yeah, I think that's what I can talk about.
Yeah, yeah, cool. And before we wrap up, I mean, and you mentioned some stuff already, but is there any place people can contact you or and find your work and stuff like that?
Um, well, I don't want to open myself up to too much contact.
Right.
I mean,
Like,
people can find me. They can follow me on Instagram. I look at my direct messages. I don't answer all of them because sometimes, I mean, perfectly honest, some
mm,
people ask too much, or they're not. They think they're ready for someone like me to make their record, and they're not. I
right.
can't. It's just not. It's just not. It's not. It's just not in the cards for me to answer everybody, but I do pay attention to it. And if there is something, and I do generally listen and consider most stuff. The harsh reality is that not everybody's music is something that I feel like I can get on board with. And I can't pay attention to everything. I have limited time. I have to make choices.
Mm,
but like reaching me through social media, and then when my website goes back up in January, there will be a way to send an email contact. But that's about as direct as and also, if I also kind of leave it to managers or artists with their own initiative, or record labels to kind of contact me. I'm someone that can be contacted, but it's sort of, there's a
people between you and
there needs to be buffers. So
buffer.
I encourage everybody I encourage anybody that feels like that they want to try to reach me to do that. But I can't respond to everybody.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense, man.
Yeah.
Awesome, Jacquire. It was awesome speaking with you, and it was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much for that, for the offer to do this with you.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Thank you, Jacquire. It was awesome to have you here, and I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Please leave a comment and a rating if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or anything you want to ask. And also, don't forget to download the free guide, 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. And I'll see you guys next week.